She doesn't chase. She doesn't beg. She doesn't explain herself because she knows who she is. And more importantly, she knows who she is becoming. A woman aligned with her worth becomes magnetic. She doesn't try to get attention. Her energy commands it. She doesn't try to fit in. Her presence redefines the room. That's not charisma. That's coherence. You see, when a woman begins to rewire the beliefs that once made her shrink, when she steps out of the identity others gave her and chooses the one her soul remembers, she becomes a force. And the universe always responds to that force. This is not about appearances. It's about alignment. It's about the silent, invisible field she begins to radiate when she merges thought with elevated emotion, when she sees herself not as a victim of her past, but as the architect of her future. This is how a queen becomes magnetic. She doesn't become magnetic by pretending to be confident. She becomes magnetic when she no longer believes the lies of limitation that have lived inside her for years. At some point, the queen must confront the mirror, not the physical one, but the mirror of her mind. That inner mirror that has reflected back every old belief, every inherited fear, every distorted image of who she thought she was. And it is in this sacred moment of awakening that she asks the most powerful question: who told me I wasn't enough? Because here's the truth: your subconscious mind is not loyal to your dreams, it's loyal to your programming. If as a little girl you were told to be quiet, to stay small, to not shine too brightly, those messages didn't just stay in your childhood. They became the language of your inner world. And unless you intentionally rewrite that code, you'll continue to live out the same patterns, different faces, same energy, same result. But the magnetic woman, the queen, she doesn't accept that fate. She steps back into the operating room of her consciousness and begins the work of reprogramming her identity, not from force, but from awareness. She becomes the observer of her thoughts, the watcher of her feelings, and in that observation, she begins to separate from the old self. She sees clearly, I am not my past. I am not my trauma. I am not the story I inherited. As she steps into this new awareness, her body, once addicted to the chemicals of stress, fear, and unworthiness, starts to feel unsafe in the familiar. But she doesn't run back. She stays, she breathes. She reminds herself that discomfort is the birthplace of transformation. Because in that space between who she was and who she's becoming, there is a gap, and in that gap she visualizes her future self, radiant, clear, grounded. She hears her speak with confidence, feels her move through the world with grace. She practices that version of herself in her mind until it becomes more familiar than the old one. And because the brain doesn't know the difference between what's imagined and what's real, she starts to rewire her neural pathways. Her biology begins to reflect her intention. Her energy begins to shift. Her frequency rises. She is no longer responding to her external world. She's creating from her internal one. She doesn't fake it until she makes it. She feels it until she becomes it. And that is how the queen reclaims her throne, not from the world, but from herself. For most of her life, she was in survival, constantly alert, hyper-aware, reacting instead of creating. Her nervous system had memorized stress like a sacred script. Her body didn't know the difference between real danger and the fear of not being enough, the fear of being abandoned, the fear of failing again. And so she lived in fight or flight, even when she smiled, even when she appeared composed. Because survival isn't loud, it's a quiet, chronic tension that lives beneath the surface of a woman who forgot her own power. But one day something within her refused to keep repeating the old story. A voice deeper than fear began to whisper, there is more. You were not born to manage your pain. You were born to create your future. That's when the shift began. That's when the queen within her started to wake up. To move from survival into creation is to choose the unknown. It's to stop living from the memory of your past and begin living from the vision of your future. It's not easy, because the familiar, even when painful, feels safe to the body, but the magnetic woman dares to step into the unfamiliar. She knows that the old emotional habits, resentment, guilt, shame, were not just feelings. They were frequencies, and those frequencies were keeping her tied to a life that didn't reflect her worth. So she begins to choose again. She chooses elevated emotions, not because life is perfect, but because she is ready to feel differently. She starts her mornings not by checking her phone or her to-do list, but by checking in with her spirit. She rehearses her future with her eyes closed. She visualizes the woman she wants to be and brings her to life with breath, with energy, with emotion. And when she does, her body starts to believe it. Her mind can't tell the difference between the memory of her past and the vision of her future if the emotion is real. And so she practices gratitude for a life not yet seen, trust in outcomes not yet known, love for a version of herself she's only beginning to meet. Now she's no longer waiting for the world to change before she feels better. She's no longer outsourcing her power to external events. She's creating from the inside out. She becomes magnetic not because she's seeking, but because she's radiating. She doesn't need to hustle for her worth anymore. She understands that aligned energy moves faster than forced action. She isn't trying to survive her day. She's designing her destiny. And that is how the Queen rises from the battlefield of survival into the throne room of creation.
She used to lead with her wounds. She didn't mean to. It just happened. Her story became her shield. Her pain became her compass. She thought she was protecting herself, but in reality, she was reliving the same chapters over and over, just with different people and settings. Every new opportunity was filtered through the lens of the past. Every connection was measured against the echoes of betrayal, abandonment, rejection, and then something powerful happened. She realized she couldn't rewrite her life if she kept rereading the same emotional script. She had learned to survive by building walls, but those same walls were keeping everything she longed for out. She had to make a different choice. She had to open her heart, not to the world, not to others, but to herself. The magnetic woman doesn't lead with her history. She leads with her heart, because the heart, when it is coherent, becomes the most powerful broadcasting signal in the body. It's not just poetic, it's science. When the heart is aligned with elevated emotions like gratitude, love, trust, and compassion, it sends a signal to every cell in the body and out into the quantum field. And that field mirrors it back. She understood this deeply, so she began to practice. At first it was hard. Her body was used to heartbreak, defensiveness, mistrust, but she stayed with it. She learned to breathe into her heart, to feel safe in openness, to feel love not because of someone else, but because of the frequency she chose to generate. Day after day, she sat in silence and tuned in. And slowly the static of the past began to clear. What remained was clarity, wholeness, power. People started to notice, not because she changed how she looked, but because she changed what she emitted. Her presence became healing, her voice soothing, her energy grounding, not because she was perfect, but because she was coherent, aligned, embodied. And when challenges came, and they still did, she no longer collapsed into old patterns. She didn't reach for chaos to feel alive. She returned to her breath, to her center. She led with her heart, always. This is not weakness, it's quantum strength. The heart is a magnet, and when it pulses with elevated emotion, it draws to you what matches its rhythm. She no longer needed to beg for love. Her very being was love, and that made her irresistible. Not just to people, but to the universe itself. She stopped being a prisoner of her past and became the architect of her emotional future. She no longer asked, "Why did this happen to me?" She asked, "How can I grow through this and love more deeply because of it?" Because she knew that when you lead with your heart, you no longer chase, you attract, you no longer repeat, you rise. And in that rise, you become magnetic. She used to wait for signs, wait for proof, wait for someone to see her, choose her, validate her. She had been conditioned to believe that life would reward her if she just worked hard enough or stayed patient long enough. But deep inside, there was a subtle ache, a longing that whispered, "Why hasn't it happened yet?" And the more she waited, the more she subtly confirmed to herself that she didn't yet have it, and that very energy kept it away. Then she realized something profound. The universe doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to who you are being. That means you can't desire love while being anchored in loneliness. You can't ask for abundance while vibrating lack. You can't long for freedom while rehearsing fear. The magnetic woman understands that reality bends not to need, but to frequency. And so she stops waiting and starts embodying. She no longer talks about what she's trying to manifest as if it's somewhere far in the future. She begins to live as if it's already hers, not pretending, but becoming. She learns to align her energy, her thoughts, her emotions, and her actions with the version of herself that already lives in that timeline. And by doing so, she collapses time. She doesn't have to force the outcome. She becomes the outcome. Every morning, she asks herself, what would the woman who already has it feel like today? How would she walk, speak, choose, rest? And then she becomes her, before the evidence shows up, before the results are visible, because she knows the evidence comes after the embodiment. That's the quantum law. When you feel the feeling ahead of the event, you're no longer living from cause and effect. You're living from cause as effect. At first, this feels unfamiliar. Her body, wired for the past, wants to resist. The mind wants to return to doubt, to fear, to the old story. But she's committed now. She catches the thoughts that pull her back and replaces them with new ones. She chooses gratitude over anxiety. She praises herself in the silence. She holds the emotional tone of her vision until it begins to feel more natural than her memory. People start asking her, what changed? But there's nothing on the outside they can point to. The change was internal, energetic, vibrational. She no longer leaks her power by needing proof. Her frequency is the proof. And so she moves through her life as if it's already done. She trusts the unseen more than the seen. She isn't desperate for love. She is love. She doesn't crave success. She embodies abundance. She doesn't chase opportunities. She magnetizes them. And when the world catches up to reflect that inner embodiment, it won't be a surprise. It will feel like the most natural thing in the world, because long before it arrived, she had already become it. So now the question becomes, are you ready to remember who you really are? Are you ready to move from survival to creation, from self-doubt to energetic certainty? Because the world doesn't need more perfect women. It needs more magnetic ones. And that woman, she already lives inside you. All she needs is for you to wake her up.